the United Nations has come out and given a catastrophic warning. All right, this is the beginning of the collapse of our international monetary system. Okay, the dominoes are falling. I've made this analogy before. We are going to see the less fortunate countries, they are going to be the first dominoes to fall, but they are going to set in motion a massive debt crisis, bankruptcy crisis, and insolvency crisis for the nations of the world, for the international economic community. All right, so big things are happening. The UN is warning of this, and we need to get prepared, guys. This is just another angle. This is another thing they want to do. Bring down the economic system, collapse all the major currencies so they can bring in a new major one world currency. All right, things like this have been announced at the World Government Summit, all right, and the World Economic Forum. These kind of things have been announced. Global cryptocurrencies, global digital currencies, and a single currency that is used by all nations on earth. This is being discussed right now, all right? And to do that, you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. You have to destroy a few monetary systems to build a new one. You essentially have to destroy all of them to build a new one, all right? So the UN is giving this grave warning, and this comes as countries all around the world are already falling. The dominoes are already falling, and America, the EU, Australia, Africa, Asia, all right, Canada, South America, it's all next. The dominoes are already falling, and your region is coming next, all right? So, sorry about that. Just to start off, Argentina to freeze prices for 1,500 consumer goods as inflation soars. All right, so Argentina, all these countries around the world are implementing price caps and price restrictions on their goods and services because their inflation is so out of control. Now they're implementing price caps, and now they're seeing massive shortages as well. And if you didn't see my video earlier, go check that out after this, because the US just put massive price caps and embargoes on oil. All right, the US and the EU. Go check that out after this video, because that's going to affect everything. But Argentina puts a freeze on 1,500 consumer goods. So this just happened just today. Argentina's government announced a deal on Friday with supermarkets and suppliers of mass consumer goods to freeze or tightly regulate prices of some 1,500 products in an attempt to contain inflation that is estimated to reach 100% this year. 100% inflation in Argentina. All right. And their solution is just to regulate prices of 1,500 different goods. Like, imagine just everything in the store being regulated: milk, butter, cereal, gas, just like every single thing, every item you buy has a government regulation. All right. And we'll get to Sri Lanka in just a second. We'll see what happens long term when there are government regulations and price caps. We'll see what happens. Sri Lanka is a perfect example of what's happening right now. All right. So this is Argentina. It says the center-left government is battling a plunge in popularity and street protests as spiraling prices sap people's purchasing power, even as a steep deficit and dwindling foreign currency reserves create a risk for the economy. Ahead of next year's elections, anger has started to swell, with poverty levels near 40%. Thousands protested on Thursday against the government, and the IMF has lent billions of dollars to the country. All right. Or I guess, no, sorry about that. They're protesting the IMF, which has lent billions of dollars, and the government. They're protesting the IMF because the IMF is very predatory. They swoop in on all these countries that are experiencing economic crisis, and they say, we'll give you even more money. And normally what this does is just make inflation even worse. It just floods their system with more currency, right? And then it also locks them into these outrageous IMF deals that have insane interest rates. So the IMF deals stipulate that they have to keep interest rates in line with inflation. So they are having 100% inflation and they're having 100% interest rates as well. It locks them into stifling their economy. Their economy is totally screwed. Stagflation, no growth, but extreme inflation at the same time. Argentina, all right, and this is a big country. This is a huge country in South America, and it's sad to see it going this way, going the way of Venezuela. This is kind of shocking, right? It's another country that had a lot of wealth, a decent economy, was doing okay for itself, like Venezuela was, and now it's been totally collapsed and overtaken. And I believe the Argentine president and the Venezuelan president and now the Brazilian president, right, are all they're all WEF speakers and leaders. They're all part of the World Economic Forum organization. They're all have like profiles on their website, right? Pretty sure all of them do. Definitely the Brazil and pretty sure the Argentine and Venezuelan leaders are all part of the World Economic Forum's plan. All right, so it's kind of not surprising that they are experiencing things like this. And stay tuned, we will get to this UN warning in just a second. I just wanted to set the stage for what's happening globally already, and then putting that together with what the UN is saying. It's devastating, all right? It's devastating because it means it's already here, it's already happening, and we are screwed. We need to get ready right now, all right? So let's get into what's happening in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is defaulting on their debt for the first time, and they are also implementing price restrictions as they are experiencing soaring inflation as well. So this is what's coming. Defaulting on countries' debts. Every single country on earth is over leveraged with debt. And there comes a point they have to pay. They have to pay. And most of them are not going to be able to pay, and they're going to have to bankrupt. All right. So let's get into Sri Lanka. It says economists fear Sri Lanka could be the first of several with IMF and talks with Egypt, Tunisia, and Pakistan. Could be the first of several to default, right? Sri Lanka has defaulted on its debts for the first time in history as it struggles with an economic and political crisis triggered by global shockwaves from the you-know-what and the war. Inflation rate has spiraled towards 40%, right? Shortages of food, fuel, and medicines and rolling power blackouts have led the nationwide protests and a plunging currency. With the government short on foreign currency reserves, it needs to pay for imports, right? So they don't even have enough reserves to get the imports on the international markets to even keep things going, right? So did you hear that? This is a theme. This is coming to the US, Europe. We think we're insulated. We think, oh, it's over there. No, it's what they are doing to these countries, they want to do to the US and the EU and the West 100 times more. 100 times more. That's what they want to do to us, what's happening in these countries. And the effect is going to be 100 times more as well, because the US is the world reserve currency. We'll get into all that in just a second, all right? More to come. But let's dive into Sri Lanka more. 40% inflation, food shortages, fuel shortages, medicine shortages, and rolling power blackouts. This is a theme, guys. This is coming everywhere. It says, the Sri Lankan central bank governor said on Thursday that the oldest democracy in Asia has fallen into a, quote, preemptive default on its debts after the expiry of a 30-day grace period missed interest payments on 2 of its sovereign bonds. It is the first default by an Asia-Pacific nation this century, according to the credit rating agency Moody's. First default this century in an Asian Pacific nation. This century. All right? This is powerful. We are living through a great reset, a great transition of the entire globe. And you need to be ready, guys. I just got chills when I read that because it's just, that's why I repeated it. The first default in a century. We are going through a massive reset, a massive global reset of the economics, the power structures, the world order, of everything we know, everything we have depended on and the world has been built on. It is being torn down, and something highly dystopian is going to be built on top of it. All right, on top of its ashes. So economists fear Sri Lanka could be the first in a wave of defaults as other low and middle income countries struggle with runaway inflation and supply shocks. The IMF has opened rescue talks with Egypt and Tunisia, both big importers of wheat from you-know-where, and with Pakistan, which has imposed power cuts because of the high cost of imported energy. Turkey is also battling 70% inflation, but so far has avoided the need for a IMF bailout because Turkey probably doesn't want this IMF bailout. Turkey's a little more savvy, probably doesn't want it, probably knows what it is, that they're going to be screwed over even worse in the long run. But this is happening, guys. Turkey is a NATO country, and they have 70% inflation. This isn't some obscure country. This is on our doorstep, and all these other countries collapsing are just gonna, they're the dominoes, all right? The dominoes are falling right now. They're falling, and we are some of the last ones. The U.S. is some of the last dominoes to fall, but it's in motion. The collapse is in motion, all right? And they have also implemented price restrictions on gas and fuel in Sri Lanka, all right? Go check out my video earlier. This is coming to the U.S. This is definitely coming here after this video. Make sure to check it out after this, all right? Finish this video first because there's big important stuff coming that the UN is warning. But, all right, Sri Lankan state-run fuel retailer has raised prices of diesel fuel and kerosene with effect on midnight on Friday, all right? It says 2 days after the government said both products are sold at a loss. So they implemented price restrictions, and they've been selling diesel and kerosene, just losing money. What business would do this? What business can operate, and what country or business can continue to operate? Here's the thing. Obviously, we don't want people to be super greedy, money to rule them, money to be their compass or whatever. If, you know what I mean? For these corporations, like, we don't want that. We don't want ultra greedy corporations. But at the same time, it's a win-win. They're making money, and then they provide a service. They provide the diesel and the kerosene. They bring it 5 minutes away from your house for you and make it super easy and convenient for you to fill up your car, right? The automated pumps and all this stuff, it's so easy. They do all the work for you. And it's a win-win, all right? They need to make some money to keep it going. And they're saying they've been selling these products at a loss for months, and they finally raised prices just a little bit. It was like a few rupees, all right? I think they used rupees, they were saying there. That's what they call their currency. They just raised it just a little bit, right? And this is what's coming to the U.S. And they're having massive shortages as well because the supply isn't there, right? They can't just produce a massive supply of oil and diesel at a loss. How long can that go on? Who's funding this loss? And this is as they're collapsing and experiencing food shortages and extreme inflation and having IMF bank deals, right? It's just insane. It's upside down world that we're living in, and it seems like it's not going to get better, guys. All right, let's dive into these other ones, and then we'll get to the UN. Pakistan, all right, quote, has no other option but to ration natural gas supplies this winter. It says, the energy crisis in Pakistan has deepened this year, and now natural gas supplies will be very limited for households, according to officials. Quote, there will be no gas supply for 16 hours a day to households. This is what they are implementing. It says households will have gas available for 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening. Highly regulated, highly restricted energy consumption and gas consumption coming to you. Remember, it was Switzerland, right? They implemented this law. If you raise your thermostat above 66 degrees, then I can't remember what the Celsius is, but around 66 degrees Fahrenheit, then you could potentially face 3 years in jail and thousands of dollars in fines every single day you are doing this for raising your thermostat above 66 degrees. And with all of the smart stuff, all these smart meters, smart thermostats, all these things have been put in place to monitor and track. You can probably see on your energy bill. I remember Duke Energy would do this. They could tell you exactly like your energy consumption for everything you're using. They're like, oh, your lights are using this much and your AC's using this much and your fridges. How do they know how much my appliances are using? It's because these smart meters can measure the wattage output, and they know what appliance is being used. They know, oh, that's a fridge. It's using 300 watts or whatever. You know what I mean? Oh, that's an AC. There was a massive spike in wattage to start it, and then there was a, you know what I mean? They can measure it all. They know exactly what you're turning on, what you're using, and a lot of it goes deeper than that. A lot of these smart meters can communicate directly with devices that will literally tell them consumption as well. All right, and this is all just the infrastructure in place for the control grid. All right, they set up the invisible control grid around us. All right, and then once it hits the fan, they turn it on. Right, still invisible, but it's the control grid. Every single thing in your house will be monitored. Oh, turn those lights off. Too many lights on. What are you doing? You have your lights on past. And they will know exactly what you're doing, all right? And this is in Pakistan. 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, 3 hours in the evening. They are testing this. They are beta testing all of this dystopian stuff to implement it worldwide very soon, all right? And I talked about it yesterday too. This is part of the secret plan they have to do this, all right? This is a plan, and their plan's been revealed. This is a agenda to do this worldwide. All right, so, and Pakistan is also the 5th largest population in the world, all right? And they have been experiencing an energy crisis as the country cannot afford to import a lot of the energy products at the current high prices. The stronger US dollar and the sky-high LNG prices have worsened the country's finances, with foreign exchange reserves down with the lowest level in 3 years. How many times? I've said that 3 or 4 times now. Foreign exchange reserves are down, all right? And it's the strong US dollar too. Countries want to move away from the dollar. Countries are going to dump the dollar very soon because they know it's not working for them. It works for the United States, so we can print unlimited money and send this money overseas to, influence, to have factors going on overseas. But the scheme is ending. It's ending soon. Countries are seeing this isn't working anymore, and they are being sucked in these bad deals and holding dollars that aren't in their best interest for them, all right? And one more thing, all right? The U.S. to give Lebanon $80 billion in aid amid economic crisis. So I talked about Lebanon a few months ago, how they're having mass bank holdups. People are going into banks demanding their life savings because it's been months, 6+ months, since orders have been put in place to block people from withdrawing their money because there was a massive bank run and inflation, and the crisis is so bad that the government is now telling people they can't get their money out of the bank. All right. And the food crisis is terrible here, and we are donating even more money here. All right. So it says 80 million, and it says we've provided 260 million to Lebanon in 2022, just this year. 260 million. And I understand the U.S. does help these countries, but at the same time, the U.S. has a food crisis. The U.S. has an energy crisis. The U.S. has homeless people. The U.S. has homeless veterans on Veterans Day. All right, happy Veterans Day weekend to all the veterans. My dad was a vet, passed away over a decade ago now. But thank you to all the veterans in the U.S. All right, if you're watching, thank you. And rest in peace to all the other veterans. But we have homeless veterans. We have all this stuff. $260 million is going to Lebanon to help them. And I'm not against helping people, but our debt is $31 trillion. The U.S. is experiencing all these massive problems. And somehow we just have all this money to give to all these countries. $260 million, just 2022 to date. 2022 is not even over, all right? So, and this is another 80 billion on top of it. So it says they also announced another 8.5 million to fund 22 new solar powered pumping stations, because they've been dealing with a crippling electricity crisis that has also led to water shortages due to a lack of power at pumping stations. This is coming to the U.S. very soon, guys. I'm telling you. And we have all this money to build all this stuff, do all this stuff, send overseas all day long, fund endless wars. But what about the U.S., guys? What about our country? We are going to get hit hard. And all this stuff is just Band-Aids. It's like, here's a Band-Aid. They are experiencing inflation, and we're just giving them more money to just, like, this is just going to create more inflation in the long term. And it's just a Band-Aid. It's just another Band-Aid on top of it before things really collapse. All right. So let's get into this. All right. Countries are joining the BRICS nation, or the BRICS currency en masse. All right. So the BRICS currency is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are the main countries that are implementing it. And this is the world reserve currency to challenge the dollar. And this is what it's all about. Collapse the dollar, collapse the current system, remove trust, remove all trust from the dollar. The dollar is used as a weapon now with sanctions, all this stuff. Countries are seeing that the dollar is vulnerable and they want to move away from it. And BRICS membership is reaching record levels. They are becoming a massive force. So it says the bloc's member states seek to negotiate a criteria and principles for the admission of new members. It says the Russian foreign minister said on a meeting that demand for BRICS membership is high. According to the Russian diplomat, over a dozen states have expressed interest in joining the group of emerging economies made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. He said, quote, interest in this global partnership is quite high and continues to grow. Applications have already been officially submitted, and member states have agreed to negotiate the criteria and principles of reviewing these applications. So they want to add as many countries as possible, and they are. All right. It says, we expect, of course, that the negotiations on criteria and principles will not take too long. We must first understand how this association will develop. It says Iran, Argentina, and Algeria have already submitted applications to become members of the group, which accounts for more than 40% of the world's population and nearly a quarter of global GDP. All right? You hear that? That's just them. That's just them. It says Iran, Argentina, and Algeria, right, account for 40% of the world's population and nearly a quarter of global GDP. They're going to join too, right? So this is becoming a massive force to reckon with, and it can actually compete with the dollar, with the USD. It could actually has potential to bring it down for countries to flee it en masse, right? It says interest has come from, quote, countries representing all developing regions of the world without exception. Asia, Africa, Latin America, right? This is huge, and countries want this. Countries are looking for this. Countries are salivating for this to get away from the dollar. And this is part of the collapse. This is engineered, all right? The dollar collapse is coming. We've all known this because it's been so abused. It's been so sent through the ringer that it's surprising that it's staying up, holding its power as it is, all right? It's one of these things, as things fleet, people cling to it even more, even though it's still fleeting. You know what I mean? So the dollar is fleeting, it is collapsing, and there is a strong dollar. People are clinging to it even more because there's a collapse. What else are they going to do? They don't know what else to do. There is no other alternative right now. But if there is an alternative, when the collapse really happens and accelerates, people are going to jump to it. This is just how markets work, and they are going to look for stability anywhere they can. So let's get into this UN official that's warning that we are in the beginning phase. This is the start of the dominoes collapsing. We are going to see the economic system of the world collapse, mass bankruptcies, mass insolvency, mass depreciation of your money, right? Money could potentially become worthless overnight if these things accelerate very quickly because they're all just getting loans from the IMF. What is the IMF? What happens when people realize the IMF is nothing as well? You know what I mean? What happens when the IMF is insolvent? The IMF has to file bankruptcy because all these countries are filing bankruptcy that have loans with the IMF. You know what I mean? This is the collapse, and we are going to see a digital global currency implemented in the midst of the ashes of all these countries going down. So this is what the UN official says. More than 50 poor countries in danger of bankruptcy. Quote, more than 50 poor countries in danger of bankruptcy. It says more than 50 of the poorest developing countries are in danger of defaulting on their debt and becoming effectively bankrupt unless the rich world offers urgent assistance, the head of the UN Development Program has warned. All right. So the rich world that's in $31 trillion in debt just needs to print more debt and give their debt to these countries, and that will get them out of debt. Right? Do you see like the position that we're in right now? It's a scary cycle, and it's a Ponzi scheme, and it's coming down. Right? It's coming down. This fractional reserve banking it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So inflation, the energy crisis, and rising interest rates are creating conditions where an increasing number of countries are in danger of default with potentially disastrous impacts on their people, according to UN's Global Development Chief. Right? This is going to affect the entire world. This is going to affect global GDP, global supply chains, global markets, and people are also going to starve and be poverty-stricken by the hundreds of millions of people, potentially billions of people. Most likely billions of people are going to be affected by this. It says there are currently 54 countries on our list of those likely to default. And if we have more shocks, interest rates go up further, borrowing becomes more expensive, energy prices, food prices, it becomes almost inevitable that we will see a number of these economies unable to pay, right? Unable to pay. And that creates a, quote, catastrophic scenario. Look at Sri Lanka, which has descended into civil strife with all the social and economic and political implications this carries with it. That's what he said. That was a quote. Look at Sri Lanka, right? So that's why I wanted to talk about Sri Lanka earlier, because they are already going through this. They have declared debt defaults. They have 40% inflation, food shortages, fuel shortages, medicine, nationwide blackouts. And the IMF said, this is coming to the globe. It's not going to be isolated to just these 54 countries. Once they go down, the rest of the world is going to go down with it. They're going to drag down global markets, global economies, everything. And I'm sure a lot of these countries supply, even if it's not massive amounts of everything, certain countries supply, I'm sure they supply critical amounts of certain materials, right? Certain countries are powerhouses in certain materials, certain minerals, certain resources. And if they go under, we could see global shortages of those resources as well. Just like Brazil, they have the largest bovine herd in the world, right? They have the most amount of cattle and everything else, bovine herd in the world. And they were having massive protests with the port shutdown, right? So 54 countries it's gonna be huge. It's gonna be a massive percentage of the world's GDP, world supply chain collapsed, all right? And then what does the IMF do? Is the IMF really able to just bail out these 54? All the IMF is just kind of a world form of the Federal Reserve in the United States. It's just like a world version of that, right? We already have a world bank. We already have a world reserve system, right? And they want to get everyone in debt to the IMF, collapse all their systems, and then the IMF takes them over. They all become, who knows, maybe they're going to force them to implement their IMF currency. They can't even use their own currency. Maybe they have to use this global currency after this mass insolvency and bankruptcy. All right, so let me know what you think about this. A UN official, the head of UN Development Program, has warned of this. All right, very serious. We need to get prepared. There's really not much we can do. The main things we can do is just have your stockpiles, all right? Have some currency and be informed. Be ready. See it coming, because it could happen quick. We know how fast. Look at this crypto stuff, all right? Look at this crypto stuff that's happening. Happened overnight almost. Billions of dollars evaporated. We could see a very similar situation. Our Federal Reserve System is almost very, very similar to this crypto collapse, right? Where people are putting money in and they're taking that money and investing it into other things to get more liabilities. And then they're just using debt to get more debt. Essentially, that's what this crypto thing happened. I'll have to make maybe I'll make a whole video on it or something. But they were just using people's money to get debt, and then using that debt to get even more debt. They just kept leveraging more debt. They were just getting loans with debt and with other people's money. And that's essentially what our Federal Reserve System kind of does, right? Even a bank, they tell you, we'll give you interest because we're going to use your money to, we're taking this money and loaning it to other people. That's why you get interest, right? We learned this in school. You get your 1% interest because they are technically using that money temporarily to lend it, right? It's in a giant pool of money. That's kind of what happened with this crypto thing, but they got caught, and they're not the banks, they're not the feds, so they can't do that. And we could see a very similar collapse. We could see a run on the banks. This Credit Suisse bank, this happened at this bank. There was a dip in the reserve minimum. All right, they went way under the reserve minimum because people freaked out and they thought the bank was going insolvent, and they all tried to get their money out, but there wasn't enough money to get out. All right, this could happen any moment. anytime, and we could see it on a global scale. And once all these countries start dumping the dollar as well, moving away from the dollar, then we're going to see hyperinflation at home, because all of these dollars have to go somewhere. Once all the countries start exchanging their dollars, then we will see our purchasing power evaporated even more. And on a global scale, we will see this, all right? And America will experience hyperinflation, because all of these trillions of dollars that we've printed, all right, that is going to come back to us, because we normally send it overseas, all right? So normally we are able to get away from the inflation of it, because it's going to a different country, all right? It still affects us some, but not as heavily, but it's going to come back all at once. All these countries are going to dump at once, and we're going to have a massive hyperinflation scenario in the US. So get ready, guys. The dominoes are falling. 54 countries are about to declare bankruptcy. That's what this UN official is warning. If there's any more shocks, and check out my video earlier, massive shock, massive oil embargo that the US and EU are implementing. That's going to be a huge shockwave throughout the entire system. So thank you guys for watching. Stay prepared, stay blessed, and have a big old blessed day.